has punked me. She says, have you ever seen the Muppets? And I said, well, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, is that the green frog? And she says, yes, but have you ever seen the two grumpy old men? I said, no. And she says, you remind me of the one on the left.
The grumpy Muppet on the left. But
Yeah.
you know, you'd be the grumpy Muppet on the right, I think.
Damn right.
I think she didn't get that.
Well,
right.
I corrected her on that.
Did
too.
you?
Yeah.
That's
And she agreed. Well, let me tell you, there's all kinds of things going on in the criminal justice system. And there was a defendant in Utah who he's a serious gang member, and he was on trial, and what he did was he lost it, got a pen, and lunged at the witness who was testifying against him, and the U.S. it was in federal court, and the U.S. Marshal shot him.
Shot him dead.
Dead, yeah, and so they had to declare a mistrial.
Yeah, I can only imagine that case.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Glad the marshal did what the marshal felt like needed to be
he
done.
had to do it.
You know, you cannot attack witnesses. And I mean that's like the big no-no. You know, we've talked about that before with witnesses in cases, even locally. Sometimes you'll get thugs that decide that they want to try to intimidate witnesses.
You know how they do it? Let me tell you one of the things they did a couple of years ago. We got a whole back row full of thugs. We were trying to thug, and they were back there with their smartphones, taking pictures of witnesses and texting them out on the street. And
Were they doing that in the courtroom? Or
yeah.
Okay.
So I saw them back there, and I called over to the police department's robbery homicide unit, and I said, come on over here, boys. We got a whole row full of who's who of thugs in Lexington. So they came over and then started seeing who was there, if anybody had any warrants or anything. And next thing you know, those boys just hit the road. But
you know, that's something that, with the way our laws have changed now, where when people go to prison, you really don't know when they're going to get out. We gripe about this every week. That affects what you do in so many ways, because you can't really look at a witness and say, listen, testify against this guy and we're going to put him away for life. And he's not going to be able to hurt you. But you really can't say that with a straight face, because the truth is, you just don't know how.
You go back to the Shane Ragland case,
yeah.
and you were the one that solved that. Character served 8 years and got out, and
yeah, I mean it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it really is, because you have to convince witnesses to do the right thing and help bring justice. But sometimes they don't get the justice they deserve either. We don't like talking about that because we don't want to discourage people from coming forward. You still got to do the right thing. And the truth of it is, though, it's a rare situation to have a witness harmed in a criminal proceeding. It's very, very rare. I've never had it happen in any of the cases that I worked. I know you've been doing this a long time, so you probably have had a couple where you've had some close calls or whatever. For the most part, it's pretty much unheard of, right? The intimidation part is not unheard of.
well, it's almost people intimidate themselves.
Yeah.
You know, their fear is almost always unjustified, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Let me tell you, a big issue we're having is a lot of shooting going on all across the country, and Lexington is no exception. And one of the things that we're having to do is deal with cases in which our witnesses are bad guys who have gotten themselves in trouble and want to see what they can do to help themselves, or they're in custody.
You're talking about witnesses that roll. These are people who have a criminal record. They're already in jail, and they're going to roll on someone else.
Right.
And quite frankly, often they do it because they want something in return for it.
Sure they do.
Right?
So what happens is that more and more and more of these kind of cases are going to be coming up, and we just have to do them and hope the public is that make up our jurors.
I know you don't like using, we call them jailhouse informants. You prefer not to use
Absolutely.
those individuals in your case. Tell me why.
Well, they're in jail.
Mm-hmm.
They want some sort of relief,
Mm-hmm.
and so that affects their credibility.
It's a credibility issue.
Sure, and so what you have to do is, if some of these yard birds want to testify against somebody, you have to corroborate what they say. You got,
Good word.
yeah, you gotta somehow their word has to be verified.
Yeah.
Somehow with other evidence. So anyway.
Well, and that you do. I mean, you will not put a quote-unquote jailhouse witness on the stand unless you are 100% sure that they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of things to do that. You know, as a detective, man, we would have to go back and find out exactly. I remember one time we had a person that came forward that was given information, and it sounded credible, but it turned out that that person was in jail in another county when this thing happened. So there's no way he could have possibly seen what he said he saw. And you know what?
Yeah, Malone still has the red rear end over that one.
You bet that. You remember that? I remember my red rear end too. But you bet that one, you know, most of the time before it gets there.
Yeah.
And that's important. So, and you know, you just throw it out there and say, look, you know, you don't lie about it. We don't lie about anything. What are you in jail for? This and this. Why are you doing this? Well, because I'm hoping, you know,
hoping to
in
get a
exchange
break.
for this, I'll
Yeah.
get a break on something. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the bottom line is you're looking for the truth, even if it has to come from somebody scummy, right? You just want
You're
the
not
truth.
kidding. Well, a new I got something that's interesting. You know these guys in Washington that are wanting to release everybody, like this fool Eric Holder, who is trying to act like an attorney general and failing miserably. There's a poll out that these people talk to themselves. Like in Frankfurt, they talk to themselves and say, aren't we smart because we're letting people out of jail? Well, this Rasmussen poll said this: what's the biggest problem in the criminal justice system? You know what they say? Americans feel even more strongly that the biggest problem in the criminal justice system is too many criminals are set free and not required to serve their time. 68% say, in America, say that the biggest problem is that the legal system lets too many people out. Not that innocent people are arrested.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that too many people are let out. Now, the problem is these people in Frankfurt or in Washington talk to themselves. It's called Inside the Beltway, or in Frankfurt, Inside Frankfurt. You see, if they get out and say to Joe on the corner, what do you think? And they'll tell him, too many people being let out of prison. Now, I hope they start to read all of
Listen,
this.
there's a reason that people in the legislative process may want to articulate that, and it's because a lot of them are defense attorneys.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, defense attorneys, they, you know, I guess I'm a little jaded, but they don't make as much money if they don't have things to defend.
If they don't have clients.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they're gonna, of course they're gonna. They want as many, I call them loopholes, as they can get, so they can milk them. I've always felt like, I know attorneys we need defense attorneys, just like we need prosecutors. They're very important. You got to have them. But I don't think it's their job to get a guilty person off. It's their job to make sure that everyone gets a fair trial, just like it's a prosecutor's job to make sure that happens, not to get a guilty person off and do a gotcha.
Okay, I'm loaded here today.
Yeah.
One of the things that's happened is, so what's happening to these people when they get out of prison, or they aren't sent to prison in the first place, like in Kentucky? Well, the Bureau of Justice Statistics studied 405,000 prisoners that were released from 30 states, and here's what they found. In the first year they were out, 57% were rearrested. By the third year they were out, 2/3 of them were arrested, and by 5 years, 3/4 of them were arrested. Now, so what's the deal? Property criminals, the ones that don't go to prison, that are probated in, 82%, the highest rate rearrest rate. Drug offenders, the drug dealers, 77%. Recidivism was highest among blacks, followed by Hispanics, then followed by whites. 84% of those people were 24 years old or younger. That's heavy duty stuff.
And those are just facts.
Those are facts, man. That's and I'm sure they didn't want to put that out.
Well, but some people would say, well, that just shows that our rehabilitation methods are not working. So we need to rethink how we're rehabilitating.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that's what
that's
they
right.
use. They turn that on you.
Well, they may turn it on you, but they don't turn it on me because I'm guilty. Put them in and keep them in. Protect us for a while.
Here's the thing. It's been my experience as a police officer that people that want to turn their life around, they have the opportunity to do that. There's so many opportunities at so many different levels. You know, unless you commit murder, you know, there are certain crimes that you don't really need to be rehabilitated for. We need to be punished, okay? And that's not about rehabilitation. I don't believe in rehabilitating murderers. You keep them in jail. Or rapists, you keep them in jail. But those that it's better for the whole, it's better for the whole of society to rehabilitate, then do it. But most of them don't want to. You know, they choose a life of crime. It's a choice that they make, and they're going to go right back to it. You know,
That's
how it works.
You're the man. The Colorado legalized pot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now they're having a surge in tourism. That's right. And it's causing all kind of problems with all of the states surrounding Colorado because these people are bringing all kind of pot back to Nebraska and Wyoming and that sort of thing. It's great. John Hinckley. Most people don't know who John Hinckley is.
Shot President
Reagan and then paralyzed James Brady. Was found not guilty because he was insane. He's out. He's 58. He's allowed to spend 17 days a month with his mother. That judge's neck is on the line if that guy breaks bad, which he probably will. Eric Holder and your president are planning to release thousands of drug dealers from federal prison because they don't think their sentence is fair. Heroin use is skyrocketing around America. Did you know that there are more people die from drug overdose deaths than homicides and traffic fatalities combined?
I did not know that.
That's heavy.
And heroin's at the top of that.
Oh yeah, well drugs of all kinds, but heroin is a significant contributor to that.
Are they doing any studies to see if there's a correlation between the more prolific use of marijuana that we're seeing in society? We know it's there now, and the fact that on the back end of this, the final phase of a person's drug experience, which is heroin, that's up and people are dying. I mean, because
I don't know. They will.
They've called marijuana a gateway drug, is the point. But are they really looking and say, look, you know what? I think everyone in America right now would agree that marijuana no longer holds the stigma it used to have to a larger percentage of people. It's more people are doing it. It's legal in some states. Mm-hmm. What are we seeing already as a result of that?
Well, we're seeing brains of young people that are using marijuana not develop. That's what we're seeing. Number one, there's some truth to the Dorito eating, TV watching, nodding teenagers. There's truth to that because their brain is not developing. So that's what we got to look forward to. Colorado, might ought to put a fence around them and keep them there. But there will be studies on what you're talking about. Are there more heroin addicts or hard drug addicts as a result of the marijuana? I can't imagine there won't be.
Well, but by the time that they take a serious look at those things and it really hits, they're not going to be able to reverse the trend.
That's right. So are we doing a half an hour?
Yeah. For half an hour today.
Oh, I got you. Well, then, okay. You want to know what's going on in Lexington? The NCAA tournament, well, they call it a celebration. I call it a mob.
Mm-hmm. Was it that bad this year? Was it?
We got some assault cases as a result of that in our office, felonies. Now, some of these characters that decided this was going to be a lot of fun and got drunk and started hurting people, they're going to be It's very interesting, Officer Don, because I had the police chief over to talk about that, and he said it's very interesting because the college kids were drinking and doing what they call a celebration, and then about 2 o'clock, things changed. The whole dynamic changed. That's when the clubs closed, and then you got the thug element starting to show up, and that's when fights started, shooting started, and that kind of stuff, and that was scary. I think the city and the university are going to have to clamp that kind of foolishness down.
Well,
And they can.
And part of that is prosecuting those that were involved in that and making sure that you send a message. I mean, that's
going to happen. One of the other issues is that I saw this week was another study that, everybody says that federal prosecutions are racist. Have you heard that before?
Oh, I've heard that all prosecutions are racist, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah.
There are certain people, I don't know that everybody, you said everybody, but there's an element that push that, and it gets pushed by the media, so yeah.
Well, there was the National Institute of Justice did a study, and here's what they found. The study is race a major factor in prosecution of people? And here's what they said: there's little systematic evidence of age, race, or gender disparities in federal prosecution decisions. The most common reason, they say, for declining to prosecute a case in federal court is the evidence is weak or insufficient. See, that's one of the things people don't understand. Sometimes when we have a murder case, we talk to families and we don't have the evidence. And they think, of course, the death penalty is only appropriate. And it is so difficult to make people understand, because we try to deal with families of victims, survivors, and man, they don't want to.
Well, of course not, and especially when they know. I mean,
Mhm.
but there's a difference in knowing that somebody did
Right.
something and being able to prove it. And the issue is, if you go with what your heart says and what you know, but you don't have the evidence, you only get one shot at it. If they're acquitted, it's done.
Yeah.
It's absolutely done. There's nothing, and so getting that across to victims makes sure that they understand. Sometimes you have to wait things out and keep digging until you get what you want. But you go back to the people who view federal prosecutions as racist. I know where that comes from. That comes from the 80s, when crack was devastating our urban communities. It was absolutely devastating the black communities.
Yep.
And in response to that,
Now, here's why. Because you were talking about cocaine, and there were two kinds. One was powder cocaine, and those are the powder cocaine is what you see in the movies that people line up.
it was always considered a rich white person's drug.
Right.
And in the 80s, it's what it was considered.
And it was expensive.
Yes.
Then here comes crack, which is a cheap form of cocaine that can be smoked, you see. And that's when the black community just was overrun by this stuff, and crack had a different effect on you because you inhaled it, it got into your system quickly, and the next thing that happens is you got all kind of violence happen, primarily in the black community, and that's when we had to basically...
The response was I know the legislative response was to help those communities. We have to get these crack dealers
Right.
off the streets so they're not selling this to your kids and daughters. They're destroying our communities. Crack is a drug that's generally associated with urban areas, just like meth is a drug now that's more associated with rural communities.
Meth is primarily a white guy's drug, and crack is primarily a black guy's
And meth
drug.
is bad. It's just as bad. I mean, but the response to that was to increase penalties so they could put these people in prison and off the street, and it worked. I mean, it was very effective because we ultimately had a reduction in crack violence. And remember all the carjackings and stuff we would have?
Uh-huh.
It cut it down. But then now, enough time passed where people forgot why they did that in the first place, and they turned it into a race issue and said, no, you just did this because it affected more black people. When it was just the opposite. It was to protect people in those communities. That's why they passed the legislation. That's why police officers work so hard to eradicate crime. It was to help, but years passed and they twisted it into something that it's not.
And